In 1929, a professor died of a heart attack in a small cabin in California. No obituary was written. Nobody seemed to care. The professor had written a few books in his time. Some of them made a splash, but that was a long time ago, and his death didn't stir the water. But then the stock market crashed, and suddenly newspapers started writing about him again, and his books went back into print. Why was he rediscovered after his death? And why had he been forgotten in the first place? This episode is about Thorstein Veblen, the scandal-ridden Norwegian-American professor who coined the term conspicuous consumption. Thorstein Veblen was not born in Norway, but his parents emigrated from Valdres, a mountainous region in Norway. Most farmers there were known as freeholders, meaning they owned the land they farmed. Veblen's parents, though, ended up owning nothing. They left Norway after losing a legal battle over the inheritance of a farm. They were among the first Norwegian immigrants to leave for America, and they traveled via present-day Germany. The Atlantic crossing took 11 weeks. They landed in Canada and then continued to the Midwest. Thorstein Veblen was born in Wisconsin in 1857. Later, the family moved to Minnesota, where they settled in Rice County. This was a Norwegian enclave at the time, isolated from Yankee towns. They spoke Norwegian and effectively created a little Norway on the prairie. According to the book Veblen's America by Joseph Dorfman, Veblen's father, Thomas Veblen, was forward-looking and experimental. By adopting new machinery and working really hard, he and his wife built a farm of modest wealth. Here is the Norwegian economist Erik Reinert. Reinert is a professor at Tallinn University of Technology and an honorary professor at University College of London. Thorstein Veblen has been a lifelong topic of interest for him, and he wrote the preface to the newest Norwegian edition of the Theory of the Leisure Class, one of Veblen's most important works. A point that Reinert makes in the preface is that Thomas Veblen's background in a hilly and not very farmable region of Norway ended up serving him well in the US.
Those from the most disadvantaged situation actually became the best farmers because they had to work so hard on the land back home. So he was definitely a successful farmer. His father was.
But the Veblen farmstead, which is now, by the way, listed as a National Historic Landmark, wasn't just a place of hard manual labor. Veblen's parents introduced the children to books early on, primarily Norwegian classics, and also made sure they received proper schooling, despite living far from the local school.
When they started school, his father went to the local town and built a house with his own hands, where his children could live. This is a spirit of do it yourself, in a sense, that was inherited from Norway, and also the fact that he was a farmer, but he could also build a wooden house.
The self-made house paid off. All the 12 Veblen kids ended up going to college, and they did well. From the get-go, Thorstein Veblen was as bright as anyone, but he was also a misfit and a loner. According to Dorfman's book, He was physically awkward and unpopular among the other boys. He had a sharp tongue and often ended up in fistfights. When he entered college, he won a prize for the best entrance exam, but he remained an outsider. His manners were rural and Norwegian. His accent faded over the years, but he followed his own path and did not obey. Carleton College, like most educational institutions at the time, was still largely occupied with theology. But Thorstein Veblen did not let the curriculum dictate his reading habits. He read natural science, history, literature, economics, and German thinkers on his own. This, combined with the fact that he had grown up in Little Norway, with different books and different ideas, made him capable of seeing America from the outside. And it was an America in rapid change that took shape during his student years. In many ways, this was the moment when the United States underwent the second industrial revolution, as small-scale production gave way to mechanized corporate capitalism.
And what was growing at the time was railroads. And you saw the beginning of some very important capitalists in the oil business. That was the Rockefellers, and also in the railroads. So instead of being a country with settlers and some manufacturing industry in the east, these big capitalists started to dominate society in a way. With the steel boom and the railroad boom, these capitalists became important, and it was also very important that at the time this was a period of what American historians called social Darwinism.
Let's place this on a timeline. In 1859, a few years after Veblen was born, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. The book introduced natural selection as a biological process. A few years later, in 1864, the English philosopher Herbert Spencer coined the phrase survival of the fittest. Spencer argued that Darwin's ideas didn't stop with biology. They could also be applied to society itself. Competition, struggle, and inequality, Spencer claimed, were natural and even beneficial. In the US, this way of thinking found eager supporters. Railroad kings, oil barons, and industrial tycoons embraced it.
The people who owned the railroads and the Rockefellers who ended up owning most of the oil business, that was a natural development. They were rich because that is how society was made. God had made many poor, but he also had made some people very rich, and that was, in a sense, the law of the land. And this development is what Veblen reacts to later on.
Veblen saw with his own eyes how crude capitalism and new technology didn't always benefit society at large. Take the railroads and the farmers as an example. You would think that railroads would be a win-win for everyone. It would become easier for farmers to bring their crops to market, reach more customers, and make more money, or so it seemed. But what really happened was that those who monopolized the railroads and controlled the infrastructure ended up squeezing the farmers. Grain prices fell and foreclosures spread. The railroad barons bullied the farmers into mortgaging their land to buy stocks in proposed railway schemes. This was one of the issues Veblen grappled with. At the same time, he found a discussion partner at Carleton. Her name was Ellen Rolfe, and they were an implausible match. Rolfe came from one of the ruling families of the Midwest, but the awkward Norwegian immigrant kid and the elite girl hit it off. At parties, they would get into a corner and talk in low tones. Veblen admired her intelligence and literary talents, and she would start to read books on economics and agnosticism. After graduating, they had to part ways for some time. Veblen taught mathematics at Monoma Academy in Madison. Later on, he moved on to Yale. Officially, he studied philosophy, but his real interest was political economy. He did great, but after graduation, jobs did not come. Universities were still shaped by clerical norms, and Veblen didn't fit in. He married Ellen Rolfe and spent 7 years on her family's farm in Minnesota. Veblen applied for tons of jobs, but never got accepted anywhere. So instead, he read obsessively, and he developed a distinct body of economic thought. And then, eventually, he landed a job at the University of Chicago. He entered the university as a marginal figure, but within a few years, he was indispensable. He edited much of the Journal of Political Economy, and he translated key German texts. And he published sharp essays on agriculture, railroads, and wheat prices. Chicago itself also shaped his thinking. The city was a study in extremes at the time. The splendor of the World's Fair stood next to mass unemployment. Veblen observed how wealth often translated into waste. During those years, the ideas that would become the theory of the leisure class took shape. In this book, that eventually was published in 1899, Veblen didn't critique the wealthy for being wealthy. More than anything, he ridiculed them for being trapped in a useless status game. What was up with those top hats the men were wearing? And why did perfectly healthy men walk around with canes? And what was up with the female corsets? Veblen essentially argued that the wealthier people became, the more unproductive their way of life grew. Wealth, he suggested, made them irrational, distorted their senses of what mattered in life, and therefore left them incapable of truly understanding the world around them.
Veblen's angle was completely new. He made fun of them. So if capitalist was famous for spending a lot of money, Veblen called that conspicuous consumption, and that changed people's attitude to successful capitalists. Showing luxury became something negative. It became conspicuous consumption. And that changed the whole dialogue in the United States. That was the theory of the leisure class in 1899.
And what is the leisure class in the way that Veblen describes it? Can you define it for us?
Well, if you look at how the book is translated, it's translated into many languages, and in some languages it is called the theory of the class who doesn't do anything. But the thing was
the unproductive class. Is that
the unproductive class.
What made the leisure class unproductive in Veblen's mind was that they didn't actually produce anything. No goods, no services. They lived off ownership, status, and control. Income came from finance and legal rights.
What Veblen saw here was a parallel to to Europe, to the feudal class in Europe. I mean, most of Europe was actually feudal, meaning that 1% owned the land and 99% were serfs on that land. And being serfs, it meant that the landlord decided everything. If a son in the family wanted to go to city to university, well, the landlord could say, well, if one person leaves here, I'll throw the whole family out of the house because I need all the labor. So it was a very unfair society. And here is something which Veblen clearly had understood, the difference between the non-feudal countries in Europe. There were essentially only three of them. It was Norway, it was Iceland, and it was Switzerland. These were the countries where there was no feudalism, and all the people who cultivated the land owned the land. So it was said that Veblen held up a mirror to the American migrants and saying, hey, you left Europe because you wanted to get away from feudalism. Here, what you now see is a new kind of feudalism, but it's not by people who own land. It's by people who know who own oil fields and railroads. They are the new kind of feudal class in the United States. And he was then saying to the Americans, well, if you want to keep the idea of America with the Statue of Liberty of all that, we have to fight this new kind of feudalism. And that really struck home with the Americans.
Veblen's book became a national bestseller. Politicians and writers took it to heart, and it helped inspire several antitrust laws. To this day, Veblen and the idea of conspicuous consumption remain cultural reference points.
You should go. If Thorstein Veblen were here, he'd tell you the same thing.
I read Veblen, but it was amazing to see that these things still go on.
You're a Marxist?
No, I'm a committed socialist, but not a Marxist.
Was Veblen a Marxist or a socialist? Many have been confused by Veblen over the years, much like this film character in the movie Metropolitan from 1990. And Veblen has often been mislabeled as the Norwegian Marx. But Veblen was no Marxist, and no socialist either. He was also not an anti-capitalist, but he was highly critical of finance and monopolies. Veblen's focus was on outcomes rather than intentions. The question of greed, for instance, didn't interest him much. What he cared about was whether greed was turned into something productive, like improving machinery, or into something unproductive, like financial speculation. In Veblen's universe, the key question was simple. Does this activity expand the society's productive capacity, or does it merely rearrange who gets paid?
And this is the kind of logic that Veblen followed, that producing things for a profit, that was good, but the profit per se, if you stuck with profit being the goal and wasted the profit in silly things, conspicuous things, that was bad. So in a sense, it's a very old understanding of separating financial capitalism from production capitalism. And as long as as financial capitalism functions in the interest of production capitalism, it's fine. But if you just accumulate mammon, unproductive wealth, that's bad.
But does it also present a better way forward? Is there a positive vision about how America is supposed to look like?
Well, he has some things that he feels is driving society. One of the things is idle curiosity. That's what you see when, let's say, children playing on the beach and they pick up a shell and they're curious, how many different shells there are. This is idle curiosity. It's not for money curiosity. And I think he thinks this is a very important human trait. And then he has the instinct of workmanship. For instance, that his father's instinct of workmanship, although he was a farmer, he went to the city where his children went to school and built a house for them. This is instinct of workmanship. And then he has parental bent. And parental, not in the sense of being parent to somebody, but the parental bent is being part of society and assisting everyone else in that society. So it's, you could say, in Europe it would be a social democratic idea that you should share.
Reading the theory of the leisure class today does not feel like reading an academic work in the modern sense. There are, for instance, no citations. Veblen also makes many claims that are so-called unfalsifiable, meaning they cannot be empirically tested. At the time, people did split hairs over it, but not necessarily for that reason I just mentioned. To put it bluntly, people on the right thought it was too radical, and people on the left thought it wasn't radical enough. Veblen was also controversial at the University of Chicago, and his personal life added to the controversy. After the success and fame of the book, he attracted many female admirers. According to Joseph Dorfman's biography, Veblen had an affair with another man's wife, and he refused to sign a pledge promising to end it. This story is, however, contested. What we do know for sure is that tension between Veblen and his wife started to build up. Veblen's marriage had always been platonic. They never had children because his wife suffered from a condition then labeled as infantilism, which prevented full sexual and physical development. Still, she did not accept that Veblen was sexually active with other women. She became jealous and vengeful, and she contributed to the rumors by sending accusatory letters. Over time, the rumors dominated the public perception of Veblen, and they led to his departure from the University of Chicago. Erik Reinert, however, argues that Veblen's reputation as a womanizer was somewhat exaggerated.
It's a sad story of a marriage that didn't function in the way marriages should do. And the rumors she spread, I think, were generally rumors. There is, for instance, the story about an affair he had with the wife of a professor. But then when you read actually in detail what happened, Veblen and this professor continued to be very close friend for ages. So it doesn't seem likely. So I think it's more the drama of his first of his first wife.
For better or worse, his days were numbered, and shortly after, he got a new job offer. By that point, he had published another book, The Theory of the business enterprise. In that book, he drew a distinction between two logics, industry and business. And he made a bold claim, namely that booms and busts in the economy were structural features of business enterprise. Speculation thrived on instability, he argued, and for that reason, financial crises were profitable for the middlemen, meaning the unproductive class. The book reached a wide readership, and Stanford president David Starr Jordan recruited Veblen, hoping to add intellectual prestige to the still young university on the West Coast. As Alex Beam later wrote in Stanford magazine, Veblen's tenure at Stanford was brief, strange, and legendary. As much as he was regarded as a genius, he was also seen as an incomprehensible genius. In lectures, he mumbled. He read the same material to freshmen and doctoral students alike. He despised grading and changed students' grades at random. "My grades are like lightning," he said. "They are liable to strike anywhere." Students fled, and Veblen was also famously unavailable. Outside his office door, he announced office hours from 10 a.m. to 10:05 a.m. on Mondays only. He rented a cottage near campus and refused modern conveniences. He cleaned dirty dishes by dragging them outside and blasting them with a garden hose. Despite his manners, women continued to gravitate toward him. His ex-wife was also not done with him and continued to send accusatory letters. According to Eric Reinert, though, the end of his Stanford career was not caused by a single scandal, but by a patchwork of reasons that were personal, institutional, and even political.
He defended the Chinese railway workers in California, and that was not good for the railway people. So he was not popular for that. The railroads on the west coast of America, not only in the United States, but all the way down to Chile, were Chinese kind of forced labor. So I think he was unpopular at Stanford also because he defended the railroad workers.
And that didn't sit well with Leland Stanford, probably, I would assume.
Yeah. But clearly the rumors hurt him. No doubt about that. But
Veblen's career continued to be unstable, and he never stayed long in any place. After Stanford, he traveled to Europe. Later on, he taught at the University of Missouri. He worked for the U.S. Food Administration, and eventually he joined the New School for Social Research in New York. His chaotic career allowed him to see universities from multiple angles, and from that vantage point, he offered his critique in the book The Higher Learning in America. In that book, Veblen argued that the universities had been taken over by business logic. According to Veblen, they had corrupted their core mission, the pursuit of knowledge. Instead, they were obsessed with rankings, public image, and pleasing business interests in order to accumulate as much money as possible. This critique obviously feels relevant today as well. After his time at the New School for Social Research, Veblen relocated to California once again. He rented a house near Stanford. He lived off the grid, and raccoons and mountain lions roamed around his little cabin. Writers and intellectuals such as John Steinbeck and Albert Einstein continued to admire him. But when he passed away of heart failure in the fall of 1929, he was largely forgotten by the general public. No obituary appeared in any major newspaper. Veblen was yesterday's news. But that all changed when the stock market crashed. Suddenly, Veblen's ideas were back. His analysis of how financial speculation produced boom and bust cycles now seemed almost prophetic. In 1934, Joseph Dorfman published a biography I have cited several times in this podcast. And the New York Times ran 7 articles praising Veblen's genius. Over the past 100 years, interest in Veblen has risen and fallen. It is just as cyclical as the economy, some would argue. In the preface to The Theory of the Leisure Class, Erik Reinert compares the interest in Veblen to the popularity of umbrellas. When the weather is fair, no one wants one. But when things start coming down hard, people do reach for it.
So again, it's raining again. We're in a situation of conspicuous consumption again, and Veblen is, I think, should become more fashionable than what he is.
How did Veblen change America?
No, I'm sure he made a direct impact. The first antitrust laws were in the early 1890s, but the really strong ones became later, between 1915 and 20, and clearly they were inspired by Veblen.
My name is Fredrik Halstveit, and this podcast was made in conjunction with Vesterheim and with the support from Norway House Foundation in San Francisco. The music you hear in the background was made by Jan Skoglund.